Lee Millar is I would call him a historian, an author, and anything else you would want to know about history. You may sit or you may stand, whichever you like
I
to
usually
do.
stand.
Okay, well, we can move now.
Okay.
We could move that
Go ahead.
thing in, maybe.
He has been
I got the comfort chair tonight.
He was a captain in the U.S. Army during Vietnam. I joined the Air Force, spent 4 years in Texas. He went to Vietnam, so it's a better place than I was. He has a BA in American History from Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, a master's degree at the University of Arkansas, and a second graduate degree at the University of Memphis. He's been on the Shelby County Historical Commission since 1997. He was the past chairman for 9 years. He has other historical events that he's been part of: the Tennessee Historical Commission, the War Advisory Council board member, Tennessee Civil War Preservation Association on the board of directors there, the West Tennessee Historical Society, past vice president, the Germantown 150th anniversary sesquicentennial,
Big word, yeah.
yeah, big long word, commission. He was on the board of directors there, and he's also on the board of directors at the Friends of Shiloh National Military Park. I'll let you tell about the rest of your attributes.
Okay.
If you'd like to know, I've got it too.
Oh, no, okay, and I belong to some other groups too.
Oh, yes, he does.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I've, I guess, lived here forever, and just like to get, I'm just really interested in history, and really it kind of came upon me. I was interested in history. In the fourth grade, our class took a field trip to Shiloh, took a bus and went there, and we thought it was fun running around and climbing on the cannons, but you know, it didn't really sink in. I just thought that was interesting, but I got interested in American history at that point, because in fourth grade, that's when we studied it. Now they hardly get it at all. And then in the seventh grade, we had American history again. And so I really got interested in the war between the states' history. And at that point, my mother said, now that she knew I was interested, she said, by the way, you have a Confederate ancestor. And so I thought, well, okay, that's good. One of the good guys. And so I just got further interested in that, and as I went on, and just did a lot of reading and research and studies around this entire area here, all over Shelby County, as well as all over the South. And here to speak to you tonight on the Battle of Bartlett. But actually, there's two of them. Several things happened here in Bartlett. Of course, during the war, it was called Union, the community of Union. It was named after the Union of the colonies, the Union of the states. Had nothing to do with those folks up north, and they just called it Union. And so when the railroad came through, it was called Union Station or Union Depot, but generally got the name of Union Station. In June 1862, Memphis was captured by the Federals after the gunboat battle on the Mississippi River, which is the world's largest inland naval battle in world history. It was right here in Memphis. Very few people know that, and unfortunately very few people in the city want to promote that. But it's one of the unique historical facts that has to do with this area, but too few people know about it. So after that June 6th, 1862 battle, Memphis was occupied and Shelby County was occupied, and then the war kind of moved south to Vicksburg and then east to Chattanooga. So there wasn't too much action around here except cavalry raids. The federal forces in Memphis kind of expanded their influence over West Tennessee and occupied all of West Tennessee and Middle Tennessee and all over. But then as the war got farther away and the armies and the major forces got farther away, then Union influence started contracting, and they were sending troops elsewhere. They still had a big problem with Confederate cavalry, though. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the primary opponent. Another one, James Chalmers, Richardson was another one, and there's several other smaller unit commanders. But Forrest was the primary one. He was the legendary one, even in his own time. Even in 62 and 63, he would become a legend. So the Union forces were really afraid of Confederate cavalry. Sherman in his march, when they were discussing it in 1864, after the battles over Chattanooga and Chickamauga Missionary Ridge and all that, and Sherman decided, and he captured Atlanta and burned it. What was he going to do next? He decided he was going to go to Charleston. Well, he conferred with Lincoln and Grant to talk about this. And they said, well, what are your biggest fears? And Sherman said, well, my infantry can lick their infantry, my artillery can outduel their artillery, but my cavalry can't hold a can in a forest. He said his biggest fear, or greatest fear, was that Forrest would get behind him. And that was pretty much the feeling of all the federal commanders all over this, the Mid-South region, was that Forrest would appear on their doorstep. And so consequently, the garrison here at Memphis was quite afraid too. From June 62 to June 63 for the next year, not very much happened around here except cavalry raids here and there. The Confederates had reoccupied Covington for a while, and there was a garrison stationed here. There were 2 regiments of cavalry here at Union, and they were really concerned that Forrest would come here and attack him as well. And let me read you a dispatch. This is from June 16, 1863. This was by Major Jonathan Jocelyn, and he's in command of about 200 men. Now, one of the things the Federals had a perpetual problem with was finding good leaders. And the younger leaders, lieutenants and captains, were generally not true trustworthy, and so they were putting higher-ranking officers in command to have some stability in there, some experienced officers. And so here we have a report of a major, and he's reporting to the captain of the adjutant in Memphis, the 5th Division Headquarters, District of Memphis. It says, Captain, I have the honor to report for the information of the General Commanding that in accordance with orders from Division Headquarters, I took command of a scouting party composed of a detachment of 50 men of the 1st Missouri Cavalry, U.S. Cavalry, and 150 men of the 5th Ohio Cavalry. I left camp on the 16th instant at 4 a.m., proceeded north on the Randolph Plank Road 5 miles and east to Raleigh, from thence half a mile east to the Covington Road, north 3 miles where I obtained information from an intelligent Negro. And there's a point right there. The Federals assumed that all black Southerners were just dumb. Of course, we live here and we know better, we know different, but he was just astonished that he had run into an intelligent Negro. It said there was no enemy nearer than Covington, distant 33 miles. My time being too limited to proceed to that place, I returned to the Raleigh Road and east of the Hatchie River, passing through the village of Union, right here, better known as Union Station, on the Memphis and Ohio Railroad. From the Hatchie, I returned to camp by a circuitous route, taking by roads and secluded paths from Randolph to Memphis, arrived back at camp at 7 p.m. And the only intelligence I gathered was that there were about 300 Confederate cavalry stationed at Covington. One other important note from this dispatch was that he took a circuitous route after he got here, coming up and around to get to here from Raleigh. Then he went back around, went to a different direction. They were afraid that they were going to get ambushed by the Confederates because they would go out on a route, do some scouting, and go back, and by that time the Confederates could get behind them and ambush them. And so he's got 200 men and is a major, but yet he still goes some other direction to avoid any possibility that General Forrest was going to get there. The first real skirmish occurred here in Bartlett in April 1864. General Forrest was at Jackson, Tennessee with about 3,000 men. He'd been recruiting, resupplying. The Federals had pretty much abandoned West Tennessee, and so the Confederates had reoccupied a lot of it. And Jackson was the headquarters of Nathan Bedford Forrest. One of the remaining outposts, garrisons in West Tennessee, was a little fort about 80 miles north here called Fort Pillow. It was on the Mississippi River. It was a Confederate fort until abandoned after the Battle of Shiloh and the troops withdrawn to Memphis and farther south. The Federals occupied Fort Pillow and for a good while, and then as the war progressed farther on, there was no need to, and the Confederate fleet was down at Vicksburg or beyond and destroyed. So the Confederates really had no force on the river of any consequence. So there was no need to have a fort up there guarding the river. So General Sherman ordered Fort Pillow abandoned, but General Hurlburt here in Memphis, the Federal commander, decided to do some enterprising business work on his own. So he kept Fort Pillow garrisoned and used it as a black market cotton depot. So his men, he would send them out from Fort Pillow out of the countryside. They would steal cotton, bring it back to Fort Pillow, ship it north, and sell it on the black market to northern mills. And General Hurlburt here in Memphis would pocket all the cash. So he was just running a real shady operation in a fort that was supposed to be abandoned. Well, one of the things that they had in the fort were a couple of cannons, which would be important to the Confederate use, and also 150 horses of the cavalry there. In addition, probably so that was a positive supplies that Forrest could get out of capturing the garrison at Fort Pillow. But the main thing was that the garrison at Fort Pillow was just garrisoned by two different regiments, the 13th U.S. Cavalry, half of whom were deserters from the Confederate Army, the other half were deserters from the Union Army. They were just a whole bunch of, just a regiment of cutthroats, and they were raiding the country, raping and pillaging and burning and stealing everybody's silver and everything like that. So there was just a den of thieves there at Fort Pillow. There was also a regiment of they're called the 2nd U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. Well, they had 2 cannons, so it was not really a regiment. It was about 60 or 80 guys, but they were not important. But the cannons were important. Well, so the citizens from here all the way up to Covington and Dyersburg and beyond came to General Forrest and Jackson and said, "You've got to do something about Fort Pillow. These ruffians, thieves, cutthroats, it's just robbers. They're just terrorizing the neighborhood." And so Forrest said, "Okay, I'll do something about it, and I can use the supplies that I captured from there too." So he's going to attack Fort Pillow, which he does it as a successful attack, and then the Yankees inflate it to becomes a massacre, which it really wasn't. So, but if you read it, General Sherman concluded it was not a massacre. That's just Northern propaganda. But when General Forrest decided to attack Fort Pillow, he knew he had to do something about the garrison at Memphis. There were about 10,000 Union soldiers here guarding Memphis, and he had to keep them here from doing something else, from going after him or going out into attack his little force that he left in Jackson. So he had to create a diversion. So he sent 2 regiments of his troops here to Bartlett to spread the word that Forrest was going to attack Memphis and therefore keep the garrison in Memphis busy. The first regiment that was here was part of the 3rd Mississippi Cavalry, the first company that was here. It was about 70 men got here first, and then the rest of the 3rd Mississippi and the 9th Tennessee Cavalry followed on to press the attack here and in Memphis and spread wild extravagant rumors that the Forrest's entire cavalry corps was coming. Here in Bartlett, there were 2 regiments of cavalry, about 300 apiece, and they would go on patrols every day, and so they had rumors that Forrest was coming, and so one regiment went out on Stage Road, and there's a farm out there called the Royster Farm, which we're not sure where it is now, what became of it, but then it was called Royster Farm. Well, the 300 Federals went out Stage Road directly east, and the Confederates coming the opposite direction, coming west. The company of 70 Confederates topped a ridge coming this way, and it was wooded on both sides. And so they were there, and across the plain were the 300 Federals, and they saw each other at the same time. The 300 Federals deployed in a line of battle. So you had 300 men on their horses, side by side, ready to either attack or receive an attack. Well, the Confederate company commander over there was a pretty smart guy, and he obviously learned from Forrest already. He knew he was already out, he's outnumbered 5 to 1. What's he going to do? Well, he does what Forrest would do, he attacks. But he sends 12 men to the right, 12 men to the left. They had extra flags in their saddlebags. They weren't carrying any at the time. So he gave a flag to this squad, a flag to this squad, and the remaining 35 men that he had, they put 2 flags on flagpoles, and we gave time for the guys to get around on the flanks of the Federal line, And then they raised their flags, and the guys on the right-hand side yelled, "Charge, forward." He said, "First Mississippi Cavalry, forward, charge." And then these guys over here said, "Second Mississippi Cavalry, forward." So they're, I don't know if you've seen that old Davy Crockett movie. It's a great scene where he's in the War of 1812, the Creek War, and he comes upon Andrew Jackson fighting the Creek Indians, he and Crockett and Georgie Russell. And so they come in, they pretend that they're reinforcements. And Davy Crockett says forward company A, and Georgie Russell says forward company B, and the Indians think it's more soldiers coming, so turns the tide of the battle. This does the same thing. And so then the company commander with his 35 men and 2 flags, so it looks like 2 regiments, they come charging out of the woods, and he's hollering, everybody's hollering, "Forward, 3rd Mississippi." And the 300 Federals think, well, I mean, the war's over for them, they're gonna get wiped out. So attacked from 3 sides, they just break and run and just charge back into Bartlett. Across the railroad, through the camps, the 300 guys that are here are now terrorized themselves. They think at least a division of Forrest cavalry are behind them. And so they immediately saddle up and ride bareback, and they all head to Memphis. Their 60 Confederates catch up out of the 70, are still in pursuit. They capture 250 of the Federals. They just ran out of time to take prisoners is what happened, or they could have captured all of them. So anyway, the remaining 350 Federals dash into Memphis saying Forrest is coming, so the ploy works. Then the 70 Confederates now round up their 250 prisoners and horses, and so they head back towards Jackson, having had a really successful day. And this is reported as the skirmish at Royster Farm, which is actually the first skirmish at Union Station, or Bartlett as we know it. The second one, so this was in April of 1864. The second engagement here in Bartlett was in November of 1864. And this, if we get to pull off a reenactment, 150th anniversary reenactment this November, this is what we'll do. Similar circumstances. Sherman is in Atlanta, he's headed to the sea. His supply lines are exposed. The Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad, the Cumberland River, the Tennessee River, they've come down the Tennessee River on boats, supply boats at Johnsonville, up by Paris Landing, basically. Unload the supplies, go by railroad to Nashville, and then by railroad down to Sherman. This is before he starts living off the land. And so Sherman's, one of his worst fears is about to be realized. Sherman's getting behind him. And so Forrest gets behind Sherman. Forrest goes up the west side of the Tennessee River, sends a force, they capture Paducah, they capture Union City, they capture Dyersburg, a lot of skirmishes, but the supply base of Johnsonville is really what he's going to get. There's a number of supply boats there, there's a couple of Union gunboats, timberclads, huge warehouses, a fort up on a hill that's really, I guess it's in a good place if it was a castle, but it's not real good for defending the depot. But large warehouses, all kinds of full of supplies, medicines, ammunition, food, uniforms, tents, everything an army would need is at Johnsonville on the Tennessee River. Well, Forrest comes down, and the same thing, he's got to create a diversion because the garrison in Memphis, there's still 8,000 or 9,000 men in Memphis. He doesn't want them moving and getting in his way or cutting him off. So he sends another cavalry detachment to Bartlett Station to cause a ruckus and cause a lot of trouble. And this is a report from the another Union report, and there are Confederate reports as well. This is from a colonel this time, who is in command of the garrison here. He says, in compliance with your instructions I have to report in regard to the affairs of the first instant, that's November 1st, 1864, in which the 10th Missouri Cavalry met with considerable loss on that day of the patrol. They'd gone out from Union Station here, going east, making sure that Forrest doesn't attack, doesn't surprise them, which in fact they do. There are two officers there, and there's about, they've got about 40 men here in this patrol that leaves Union Station and heads east. Lieutenants Norman and Lieutenant Miles Riley, having crossed the Wolf River, these guys were sent out from Memphis to the garrison here to continue patrolling. Arriving at the depot, Union Depot here, at 10 o'clock. At this point, Lieutenant Norman, being able to learn anything of the enemy in force, took 15 men, proceeded to patrol towards Somerville, leaving 25 men at Union Depot under Lieutenant Riley, who was particularly cautioned to be on the alert because they knew at any time there was got to be Confederates would just appear out of nowhere and attack. Lieutenant Norman goes out, and just about the same thing happens as the April battle in '64. Lieutenant Norman is out there. He's got about 20 men going east. The first company of Confederates comes up again, and there's only about 60 of them. And so the Federals panic and they start dashing back into the garrison here. The 60 Confederates pursue. They capture Norman's entire force. Riley, hearing gunshots coming, they retreat immediately and they head back to Memphis with his 20 men, the other half of his patrol. The garrison here, as soon as they got word that something was happening, they let out. So they're gone. So the 60 Confederates capture Norman's 20 men, they rout Riley's 20 men, capture about half of them, and then they capture some of the garrison that's here as well. And this colonel who had sent out these two guys on patrol says there were not over 50 or 60 rebels, according to the best information I get, and there was no cause for Lieutenant Riley leaving his post, but they charged upon him with shots and yells and put him to flight because they just knew at least 2 brigades of Confederate cavalry were coming. There has to be millions of them out there. And that was one of the great exaggerations of the war. They interviewed General Washburn here at headquarters, Memphis, the newspaper, about how many men that was reported that Forrest had. And he said, well, if you go by the reports of my officers, General Forrest has about 300,000 men. Because every time I send somebody out, they say they're outnumbered at least 10 to 1 when they come back. So if you figure that Forrest has 3,000 men and he gets into all these engagements and you figure there's got to be 3,000 here and 3,000 here and 3,000 here and 3,000, that adds up, so he's got to have 300,000 men. So the rebels pursued and captured most of his party. The lieutenant returning was warned of the fact that Riley had left Union Station. The rebels were there, so they had captured Bartlett. Confederates then and headed for the Wolf River, spending but little time on the way. So the enemy charged, and although some shots were given in return, they did not make any resistance, and our entire garrison returned to Memphis. It says the alarm reached me at camp at 1 o'clock, and taking with me 75 men of the 10th Missouri. So here's a colonel commanding 75 men. Usually that's a captain, but here once again, their officers are so afraid that they got to get somebody who's gonna, go forward, go out there. Nobody else wants to go. So he takes 75 men, and they return to Bartlett Station, return here, reoccupy the ground, and find out that the Confederates had withdrawn. But by that time, they've been successful already. The alarm was spread. All the troops in Memphis are under arms, waiting for the impending attack from Forrest Cavalry Corps. So the ruse has been successful, and Forrest has pinned down all the men here with only 60 or 70 of his own men. And the colonel says, I moved out a little ways towards the Grange, but as night was setting, I did further pursuit, hopeless, and I returned. Well, he didn't want to go, press him very far. So he made a good excuse that it was time to go back to camp. But he had another little paragraph here about berating the junior officers that skedaddled and abandoned Bartlett Station. So that was the second skirmish at Bartlett Station, and pretty much that was the end of the fighting around this area. There continued to be other little cavalry scouts, engagements, and occasional shots here and there, but nothing of any significance like these were. Any questions?
You by any chance know the Confederate units that took part in that second raid? Mississippi, was on the first one.
Right. No, I'm not sure. I believe that it was the 9th Tennessee Infantry Cavalry again, and then there was another regiment that was involved too. I'm not sure what the second one was. They didn't make a report. Just the Tennesseans made the report. It could very well have been the 3rd Mississippi again, since they were familiar with the area, having been here before. Forrest was, smart enough. He would send guys who knew about the area to do it. So likely sent them again, but it doesn't say. The reports don't say. Yeah, Barry.
These good people might be interested in Forrest's actual visit he made here in August of 1864.
Yes.
General Maxwell at that time, what he was.
Yes, yeah. In August of 1864, General A.J. Smith from Memphis had set out to invade Mississippi, to burn the wheat fields, the granary of the South, as they call it, destroy the Mississippi Central Railroad, and destroy Ole Miss at Oxford. So with 9,000 men, he left Memphis, went to Collierville, LaGrange, headed south. Again, Forrest only had 3,000 men, so he's outnumbered 3-1. And the Federals have just got superior weapons and artillery and food by this time, and so he's kind of in a predicament. Forrest is. So they occupy, get close to. They work their way down, fighting, and Forrest and General Chalmers doing a delaying action to keep them away from Oxford. But they get to the outskirts of Oxford, and Forrest decides this calls for some bold action. Something has to be done. So he took 1,500 men, and they rode east from Oxford, leaving Chalmers with only 1,500 men to oppose 9,000 men. So he's really outnumbered. But they build up fires, and so instead of every company of 80 or 100 men having a company fire, they do one for like every 10 or 15 men. So they've got like zillion fires going at night. So Smith still thinks that there's at least 20,000 Confederates in front of him, so he's a little reluctant. Meanwhile, Forrest with his 1,500 men, they ride directly west, hit Highway 61. The interstate hadn't been built yet. Comes up through Hernando, enters Memphis. He totally surprises the garrison at Memphis. They have no clue that Confederates could be anywhere closer than Oxford, where all the action is. He captures the outlying post. They ride into town August 24th, 1864. He sends squads different places to capture different generals that are here. There are 3 generals here staying at the time. There's Confederate prisoners down at Court Square, the Irving Block building, which is converted to a prison, to free them, to capture supplies and stuff, and capture the telegraph office. And interesting thing, instead of destroying the telegraph office, he puts 2 of his own men in there who were former telegraphers. And they telegraph St. Louis that Forrest has captured Memphis and he has 10,000 men. Well, so they call out the Missouri State Guard because they know he's going there next. And then his 2 guys, they telegraph Cincinnati. And he said, Forrest is moving into Kentucky, he's headed to Louisville, he's going to capture, he's got 20,000 men. Well, the telegrapher the Union telegrapher at Louisville, Kentucky, sees this message, and so he telegraphs Chicago and says Forrest has 30,000 men, and he's headed north. He's got 100 cannons. So it just grows. So meanwhile, so as Forrest's other squads, his brother rides into the Galeson Hotel after one of the generals. Another squad rides into the Union headquarters where Redbird's AutoZone Park was the federal headquarters there, where General Washburn was staying. And so they hear, because this is like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but everybody's up because all the Confederates in town know that Forrest is coming. And so they're all cheering, they're riding through town. Well, Washburn hears the Confederates coming in the front door, so he goes out the back door. And the Confederates go upstairs, and the captured General Washburn's dress uniform, because he's running out in his nightshirt. And he's also left behind one other important thing. I mean, he saved himself, but he lost his dress uniform, and he also left behind Mrs. Washburn. Yeah. So he slept on the couch for the rest of the war. Yeah, Nick?
Yeah, this is not a question, just a point of interest. My sister's here. Our great-grandfather is Nicholas Scotton, who served with Forrest in the 3rd Cavalry, the old regiment, Company
Yes.
C. And after the war, he, by the way, he spent 4 years and was wounded twice and captured once. But he came back to Bartlett and built this house in which we're sitting right now. And there's a lot of history that someday I could relate.
Yes. Yeah, he was in Company C, the 3rd Tennessee Cavalry, yeah, Forrest's 1st regiment that he recruited. But anyway, that was the story that Barry brought up about that. And so, because the telegrams are going out all over the place that Forrest has actually captured Memphis, they immediately, from St. Louis headquarters, Western headquarters there, they telegraph to LaGrange and down to Oxford, where Smith's army is, and they tell him to get back to Memphis immediately to recapture Memphis. So they leave Oxford. They don't destroy any of the railroad. They don't destroy any of the wheat fields down there. So Mississippi is saved. They did burn some of the buildings at Oxford, but not the whole town. So Forrest's move essentially saved the University of Mississippi from getting leveled. So yeah, just another example of his, I guess, strategy. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, when you first started reading, did you mention the name Jocelyn?
Yes, Jonathan Jocelyn.
Jonathan
Yes,
Jocelyn?
he was a
Who's
major,
that?
major in the Union Army garrisoned here.
The Union
Yes.
Army?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Of course, there were some Jocelyn's on both sides.
I started to say I might have a Yankee answer. I didn't know that.
There's one somewhere they don't claim them.
Yeah, that happens. I just briefly, I know everybody likes to talk about their ancestors. Several of my ancestors lived in Maryland. There were 7 brothers in this particular family, and they knew the war was coming. They were Southern sympathizers. 6 of them crossed the Potomac River and joined the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia. The 7th one really didn't want to have anything to do with the war at all, so he moved west to Illinois to get away from the war and got drafted by the Union Army. So he ended up getting in the war anyway, and so he didn't do anything for his 90 days were up, and then he went home, so he was done. So he stayed out of it, but he was a Union veteran for a little while. Anyway, but that's where they end up, both sides fighting. Yes?
I want to see if I have this right, because I'm not sure I understood it right.
Okay.
The second skirmish in
Yes.
November,
Yes.
you said that the Union Army was in Bartlett, and the
Yes.
Confederates came and took it over,
Yes.
and that the Union Army went back to Memphis. And
Yes.
then you said later on in the day, the Union Army came back and found that the Confederates had retreated.
Yes.
So they took over Bartlett again?
Yes.
And so, yes, the Union.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, the Union had it in the morning and the Union had it at night.
Yes.
So why did the Confederates attack it? Because the soldiers were there and then retreated?
Yes. Yeah, they attacked it because the Federal soldiers were here, and so they wanted to give the impression that Forrest's entire cavalry corps was going to attack Memphis, and they were coming through Bartlett to do it.
Okay.
So they're coming from Jackson, Somerville, and Oliver, and those roads, and coming down Stage Road. Bartlett was the next intersection, next town, and so that was the likely spot. So that's why they attacked the garrison here at Bartlett, because they knew these guys would immediately run back to Memphis and
Okay.
tell them the
So
Confederates were
then when they
coming.
retreated, where did they go?
And so when the Confederates left, they went back to Somerville and back to Jackson. And the Federals reoccupied Bartlett that night, and then found that the Confederates were gone, and then they went back to Memphis as well. They didn't stay
Oh, okay.
because they were just afraid of getting attacked again, so they didn't want to be exposed out here in Bartlett. So they then abandoned the town as well.
Thank you.
Yes?
Do we have any idea right where their company was located? I mean, you know, it couldn't have been too big, there's probably a lot of trees here then.
Actually, it's pretty open.
Okay.
And yeah, it was not nearly wooded like it is now, but it was really, really open, a lot of plains, just open ground. I know some of the Federals camped where the Kroger is,
Mhm.
over there, on that kind of rise, that ground right there, and because they like the water from the creek. And then they camped, let's see, from the depot, they camped southwest of the depot, also in that area there. And then there were several other camps, because they would come and go. They would garrison it for a while, and then they'd leave, and then they'd come back, just depending on, you know, the ebb and flow of the war and what was important. And but Bartlett was important because it was on the road to Memphis. And with the Federal garrison here, the Confederates could attack here, and they know they could stir up some trouble, because the Federals would immediately report back to Memphis, you know, that there was a battle going on, that the Confederates were coming, and so it tended to alarm the garrison at Memphis, and which was the idea, was to keep them occupied while force was elsewhere. And by the way, he did destroy Johnsonville up there, and destroyed about $2 million worth of supplies of the entire warehouse complex there that Sherman had built up. And so that's probably about $40 million worth of supplies today in today's dollars, about 20 times. So that's you know, a considerable loss to the Union Army. And so at that point, that's when Sherman decided he'd have to live off the land, because he couldn't trust the railroad and the rear guard.
Do we know where that battle line was formed up in the first grade?
In the first one, the Battle of Royster, skirmish at Royster Farm, no, nobody knows where Royster Farm is. I saw it on a map, an early map of the, and by the way, oh, you know why, I guess y'all, I'm sure y'all know why Bartlett was named Bartlett. That there was a doctor named Bartlett lived over here.
No, not a doctor.
Major.
A major Bartlett, yeah.
But he really wasn't a major.
No, so that was-
He was a shopkeeper.
And yeah, an honorary title, yeah, yeah. And so, but he lived this way. Well, Royster Farm is this way, is east of town.
It's near Elmore.
You know where it is?
I
Oh,
think it
okay,
is, in that area.
okay. Well, that's what the Confederates called it, the skirmish at Royster Farm.
Oh, I've never heard of it before. We have to do a little research.
Yeah.
When your father in the prison downtown,
No, my
I mean,
great
your grandfather, I'm sorry, yeah.
He was, yes.
For what, 3 years, wasn't it?
No,
Oh.
nothing like that, no.
Okay.
Urban Block Prison, which was a hospital prior to that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Any other questions, Barry?
Up 64 Highway, according to the little church out there, Morning Sun, Presbyterian Church, their history stuff,
Yes.
they're talking about the scrimmage out there at Sea-Tick Road in 64. Is that part of that same thing, that Royster?
That was earlier. No, that was earlier.
Yeah.
Earlier in the war.
Because their records show that the Confederates attacked a Union supply train going through.
Right.
And there's 12 of them that didn't make it home there. They were buried in unknown graves in that cemetery across the road, 12 Union soldiers.
Right. Yeah. It was a wagon train that Confederates captured. Yeah. All right. Well, yes.
Are there any current plan for any more reenactments, like they had one several years ago out at Pinnell Farm? Any plans for another reenactment?
Well, we hope to do one here in November for the Sesquicentennial Battle of Bartlett. There in November to celebrate that one. But as far as big ones, there's a big one in June 14th and 15th at Bryce's Crossroads, Mississippi, down by Ripley. That's the 150th Battle of Bryce's Crossroads. That'll be the biggest one this year in the area. Probably be about 2,000 reenactors for that one. That'll be fairly sizable. But that's the only major one of this year. We and Barry and a bunch of others do Civil War reenacting, and we did the one at Shelby Farms, the two of them there a number of years ago. And the county's asked us to do another one over there. But it's such a great undertaking to do something like that when you have, 1,000 soldiers, reenactors there, and then you got porta-johns and firewood and hay and water and an ambulance on standby and fire truck in case there's a grass fire, and so it's just a big, it's a lot to do to put on a major reenactment like that. So we've just not gotten around to trying to get sponsorships and all to do that, because it's just a big undertaking to put on an event like that. And then when you get 5 or 6 or 10,000 spectators there too, it takes a lot of porta johns. The health department requires you to have.
Yeah.
So that's, just one of those little things.
One last thing, I
Yes.
guess. You have a passion for Save the Parks,
Yes.
Forest Park and the other 2 parks, and
Yes, let me pass these out.
he is spearheading this effort. And if anyone would like to make a contribution, he didn't ask me to announce that, but I'm certainly gonna help.
Yeah, yes. Thanks, Nick.
The thing is not over yet.
No.
Still in limbo.
We've taken the city to court. We've sued the city and the city council about the parks. The 3 parks, Confederate Park, Jefferson Davis Park, and Forest Park downtown. The Memphis City Council passed an illegal resolution to try to rename the parks. The city council does not have the authority, and it's in the city charter. The city council does not have the authority to rename a park. Only the mayor can. But the council is trying to enforce that illegal resolution. And even though they've admitted in their answer that only the mayor has the authority, they still refuse to acknowledge it. And they still want to enforce that illegal resolution. So we've got to take them to court to make them do the right thing. And so we've had to sue them, and so we've, got mounting legal fees to go to court. We've had 4 hearings so far. We won the first 3. The 4th one was just a week ago, and so we haven't heard the judge's ruling yet on that one, on standing and some other issues, but we feel confident we've got that, because in one of the city's answers, they admitted we have standing to sue the city. Their initial defense was that as citizens, we don't have the right to question their authority. And so, which, as y'all know, is a rather absurd position to take. So they said, you can't sue us. We said, yes, we're going to. So anyway, so this is our effort to save those parks, to preserve our history, just like y'all are interested in doing. So, yes, ma'am.
2 questions. Is this a 501c3
Yes.
organization? Which, is it the Parks Defense Fund or Citizens to Save Parks?
Either way, or the Forest Camp SCV.
Well, now, which one, not all of them are 501c3, are they?
The Citizens Save Our Parks and the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which is the Forest Camp right there, which is one of the
I see. And
one of the
who
SCV groups.
is the attorney that is leading your fight?
We have a team of attorneys. It's Doug Jones and Barbara Paratelli from here. The firm is Shulman, Lehman, and Bennett from Nashville, because none of the attorneys would take it on, because they knew it was just, anyway, a problem. So anyway, so we got one of the largest firms in Nashville to represent us to sue the city. And so actually we've had a law firm from Texas doing legal research for us, another law firm in North Carolina helping out. And we found just all kinds of case law against the city, that they're just flat wrong. But anyway, so that's who our legal team is.
Are they pro bono?
No. No, this is considerable, yeah, so it's costing us a lot of money to do this, but it's something we're gonna do, because we're not gonna let the city try to erase our history. So, yeah, Barry.
Tell them what the attorneys from Nashville did at the Vanderbilt case.
Oh, yeah, a couple of years ago, Vanderbilt, there's a dormitory on the Vanderbilt campus called Confederate Hall. It was built by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and it was to provide free housing for any daughter of a Confederate veteran to go to Vanderbilt. And so it carried on to the sons then and the grandsons and granddaughters, that the UDC maintained this dormitory called Confederate Hall, and it would provide the room and board for the students and descendants of veterans. And of course, now it's 150 years later, and so this was a few years ago. So there's no sons or daughters of Confederate veterans left, and so they just made it a dormitory for anybody. Well, Vanderbilt felt now, since there's no actual sons or daughters of veterans attending, that they could rename the dormitory to something else instead of Confederate Memorial Hall. And so the chancellor decided, the president decided to do that. Well, the United Daughters of the Confederacy sued Vanderbilt, said, no, you cannot rename the Confederate Memorial Hall, the dormitory. And so they went to court, and our attorneys were the ones that handled the case for the UDC, and they won. So Confederate Memorial Hall is still there on the Vanderbilt campus, it's still a dormitory, and still says Confederate Memorial Hall on it. So Vanderbilt couldn't rename it.
Lee, was that probably because also it was deeded that way in perpetuity?
Yes.
I mean, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it was, when the UDC gave it to Vanderbilt,
Yes.
it was on the provision that the name would stay that way.
Gotcha.
And so the Vanderbilt said they wanted to change it, and they were too long ago, and they were just gonna change it, so they just can't. They're not going to now. Okay, let me leave you with one more story. Oh, you had, yes?
You said that you were planning a skirmish in
Yes.
November. We would very much like to be a part of that.
Oh, of course, yes.
Our
Certainly,
society.
certainly. Okay, great, because it takes a whole lot of work, as I said. We'll want to have food vendors there for the spectators, we need to sell tickets, and the way we usually do it is that the people who help sell tickets get a portion of the proceeds, so if y'all sell tickets, then the society will get some of the money. So that's what we do for, help like that, but yeah, I will get back to you, Sue, on that, on all those things, because we would love some help, because we gotta find, firewood and all kinds of, like I said, mentioned before, things we're gonna round up to have to put on the reenactment. And so, yeah, we'll be talking about that.
Is this the forest camp that is gonna be doing this reenactment?
Actually, it'll be our reenactment group, it's the 51st Tennessee Infantry,
Okay.
which is a reenactment group. Does these, we were the ones that did Shiloh 2 years ago, 150th Shiloh, and a number of others. So we did the Battle of Carterville, 150th Carterville last year. So that's what, but I'll send you, Nick, and Sue, give y'all the information, and y'all can give it to everybody else in the society. Okay, let me leave you with one more thing, one more story. That after the war, there was an ex-Confederate who lived here in Bartlett. He was out hunting, and he got out in this wooded area, and he came to this big clearing out in the woods. And in the middle of the clearing was this huge brown bear that had been killed. And so he kind of walks over to it, this ex-Confederate's walking over to it, and out from around this big, huge bear comes a little ex-Yankee, little short ex-Union soldier. And the ex-Confederate says, did you kill this bear? And the little Yankee says, well, yes, I did. I did it with my club. And the Southerner says, with your club? Well, how big is your club? And the Yankee says, well, there's about 50 or 60 of us. Okay, that's all.